And so now we're going to roll right into our workshop.
Great. I think I'm gonna stay here. I'm excited tonight to share in the presentation of this multi-year planning conversation workshop with Dr. Scallon. So we've been able to collaborate a little bit since the Finance Committee meeting last Monday about this topic and thinking about a number of things that we have going on, kind of threading together as we approach school year 23-24. So kind of acknowledge that we're both need to address these fiscal challenges as we've talked about. We obviously have Dr. Scallon's onboarding and kind of orientation to the district and his process in terms of learning. And then as we've also teed up in our work in the coming year, kind of connected to all of this is kind of the updating, refreshing of the Portland Promise 2.0 and the revisiting of that language and some of the metrics that we'll be using in terms of refreshing the strategic plan for the next 5 years, because we've ended the first 5-year cycle as it relates to that. So we've been, back and forth thinking about how we really thread all three of those bodies work together to be kind of established in a coherent way and to leverage the community engagement that's an essential part of each of those strands, right? As we move forward in the fall. So I will begin a little bit with just a reminder of some of the fiscal context that brings this forward for us. And then I'll invite Dr. Scallon to talk a little bit of, how we've been iterating in terms of from the discussion with the Finance Committee around process in terms of engagement, to get to both, to addressing kind of all three of those pieces, but obviously most critically tonight, how we're thinking about the fiscal 25-year context. So let me start. So I'll, go quickly. These are slides that are familiar to us, but just want to, again, bring it back to the forefront. Part of our commitment in, engaging in this current year, FY24 budget process was to continue to bring visibility towards the kind of future and the fiscal challenges on the horizon for us that come from, two kind of significant pressures, or at least two, that of the sunsetting of our federal resources, for which we've relied on significantly over the past number of years as we've come out of the pandemic. And then, the rising local valuation, which is having pressure on our state revenue and state allocation. So thus generating more pressure on our local tax contribution to our school overall budget. And certainly the ongoing, kind of financial price, cost increases in prices are an additional pressure in terms of rollover budgets year to year. So as you'll remember, Miranda helped prepare this before she transitioned out in May in terms of based on the most recent state funding we received. So this is inclusive of, the additional EPS allocation, or not additional, but the appropriate EPS allocation that was determined. The first one was erroneous, but so this represents the full EPS allocation that we're receiving. And so, here you can see that, the scenario one is, maintains that, we would be looking at a loss of EPS subsidy, of approximately $9 million in that instance. So that's a decrease of almost 43% or 44%, if all else remained equal except for the kind of increases in terms of our valuation. And then, if scenario two, if things held stable as they were this year, we still would be looking at over a $4 million potential reduction in our EPS allocation. So that sums up to be looking at, kind of the high level outlook summary as we stand here today. Obviously, kind of the most challenging potential scenario. But, so the first row indicates, what that prior slide identified, which was, a potential of a $4.2 million or $4.3 million EPS loss. Initial estimates in terms of rollover costs from inflation, adjustments based on the contracts we've landed, and so forth, of about $5.7 million, increases in debt service next year to the tune of $1.7 million. And then we have about almost $7.7 million in ESSER programming that we've funded this year. So that brings the overall total of additional costs next year to the range of just over $19 million. So that would equate if we just carried that all forward, without changes to either on the revenue side or on the cost side, would implicate a tax rate increase of 16.6%. Just a reminder as we dig into this in the coming year and, re-engage in prioritization about our SRF resources, not all SRF costs are the same in terms of that $7.7 million figure identified in the prior slide. So this breaks it down to a little more nuance of, what we might determine as kind of core services or ratio-based investments. If you'll remember, Chair Figdor called this out as we move this through. Just those are ones that our own staffing methodologies would imply should be part of the local budget. So that's just over $1 million worth of costs. The Portland Promise investments, so strategic investments, particularly as they relate to social and emotional health and learning acceleration that are aligned to those, efforts that we would, ideally like to see continue because, as we know, we haven't fully recovered. That's an ongoing body of work for us. So that's another significant chunk. But there are, just over $2 million in costs in, that we would expect to kind of sunset in terms of FY25. So that's a combination of, some technical assistance, some of the initial curriculum purchases that were one-time purchases. So, that 7.6 figure, may be more accurately reflected as $5.5 or so million in terms of potential costs we would want to have on the table for prioritization. And then, yep.
Sorry to interrupt, but I'm wondering, as we go deeper in this, what I would really like to see is, we've planned for, we've done our best to plan for this, and specifically with our fund balances.
Yep.
And so I would like to look at a version of this that doesn't have the 2.1 million that of ESSER funding that we can reduce or eliminate, that has been identified as we're able to reduce or eliminate it. And also looking at our fund balances and potentially how much room that gives us, still needing to maintain, adequate fund balances, but understanding that we're going to need to spend some of those down to deal with this, because that gets us more at the actual delta.
Yep. So
just really appreciate all the works that you're presenting tonight. In the next iteration, I would love to see that. So it just gets us to that more of an understanding about what we're really needing to aim for.
Yep.
And recognizing there's unknowns largely with the state, but.
Yep. And that's certainly that continued advocacy on that level in terms of revenue enhancements and even things that may emerge, in terms of ELL hardship resources and things like that. So yes, a lot to navigate, and certainly we'll bring forward the fund balance. As you'll remember, we went on a deep dive on that, and I think Finance Committee during the budget process in terms of how Miranda had been kind of strategically laying it out, and there'll be decisions for us about how much to utilize those, where to prioritize and utilize those over the next couple of years in terms of mitigating the impact of some of the debt service costs as they start to decrease, but remain with us until the pension obligation bond is.
And not just debt service, right? Like we now have healthy reserves across the board. So that's just to get like the snapshot that of our budget, as we're looking towards needing to make these budget shifts.
Yep. Great. So, with that in mind, right, this was just a slide of various scenarios of what it might take. And so, it's not only tax levy, certainly that, our strategies towards mitigating our financial challenges, right? But certainly, this slide presents kind of what it potentially might take starting at that kind of highest level figure. Then lastly, just to bring back, some very significant, potential impacts in terms of how we organize and operate schools that we're going to be engaging in. And so, we had a robust conversation, with the Finance Committee about the need, and we'll talk a little bit more about how to do deeper learning around this and analysis around these different strategies. So things like elementary reconfiguration, which was on the table, I think only, Member Figdor and Member Vice Chair Bondo were on the board at that time when that came forward in the spring of 2020. So a lot of kind of reintroduction of some of these and, updating our analyses will be a big part of that work. So recognize kind of the learning that was articulated that board members are going to need to engage in, and we'll need to make transparent to the public in terms of these as we move through the moves in the fall and the engagement in the fall into the winter to get to decision making. But these were a number of the kinds of, strategies that have emerged over time as potential ways to both kind of make some structural adjustments, right? Even with the debt service and some of our fund balances, we believe to, kind of address this in a sustainable way over time. So we're not year to year kind of, experiencing this kind of potential financial stress, that we may need to make some structural adjustments to be able to have us on a clear kind of 5-year footing, and that we have sufficient resources to invest in kind of our equity work to ensure that all students are able to graduate prepared and empowered as defined by our portrait of a grad that we heard about earlier. So with that, I'm excited to invite Dr. Scallon into the conversation here this evening. And as I said, we've been balancing kind of these 3 strands of bodies of work that are overlapping in terms of kind of the need for community engagement, the need for learning around, what we are, what we're trying to do as a system in a district and reconnecting around that. And then obviously, as Dr. Scallon's jumping in the heat of a number of, in a challenging environment, at least from a fiscal context, his own learning to get up to speed on all things Portland and the context that we're navigating here, and then bringing forward his insights in leadership from all of his prior experiences. So with that, Dr. Scallon, excited to have you kind of take over, and I'll move us through.
Yeah, that's perfect. I really appreciate it. Board members, I appreciate the time this evening, and looking forward in, August to being there in person with you and doing the first board meeting in person and not on Zoom. I think what Deputy Superintendent Townsend shared is exactly the right framing of how I'm thinking about this, which is how do we take advantage of sort of 3 strands, right? So my transition into the district and making sure that we're building off of all of the great strengths in Portland and the work that's already there, so that we're not starting from scratch. And I think we heard part of that work this evening, both in terms of the high school visioning as well as the multilingual work. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what that first transition looks like, the doubling down or revisiting of the strategic plan, and then making sure that we have an aligned budget to it. Aaron, do you want to go to the next slide? And so this slide sort of gives an overview of the 3 phases, as well as the deliverables that I would anticipate coming from this, with the idea going that we go from listening and learning in July through October to really having a strong budget that aligns to a strategic plan within the budget timeframe. And so that we're set for community approval in June. And so the first phase is focused around listening and learning. And so that is around us as a district meeting with the community members to learn what is working well and potentially areas of opportunity. Because of the size of the financial challenges, part of it will be about asking the board to identify potential structural shifts that they want us to research, but not commit to, but just to research and to understand further. And so in that first phase, and really engaging the community and building off of the other data that we have, I anticipate sharing with the board, with the community, a report on the key trends that arise in that report. Second is around some key actions to guide our work in school year 23-24, and then further analysis of some of those structural shifts that the board requests. In phase 2, we take those trends, and with a sort of community engagement process that has a number of committees, we develop out a strategic plan that's aligned to the Portland Promise and to addressing the areas that we heard. And so we would have the committees work and develop and assign both goals and guardrails. So goals that we're aiming to achieve, as well as guardrails that sort of guide our work and tell us what we're going to work on, what we're going to focus on. We'd have a draft 5-year strategic plan. And if we were moving forward with any structural shifts for fiscal year 25, we would have them identified. And then Phase 3 is making sure that we have that aligned 1 and 5 year budget that aligns to that strategic plan. And so if we went a little bit deeper on each of the phases, as I talked about, and I'll just go through this really quickly because of time. Phase 1, that listen and learn, is really about engaging the community. It's about identifying key trends and then having those key actions for school year 23-24, as well as making sure that we start off the school year strong. And so we have a really strong school operations start. The piece I want to dive into is this one. So we have those trends identified from phase 1. Phase 2 is about having committees that include community members, board members, school staff, district staff, across a number of committees. You can see draft ones there. And those committees work to put together the clear goals and guardrails for our 5-year plan, a draft strategic plan that identifies the key actions, and then again, any structural shifts that we're going to make. And then phase 3 is about making sure that we have a budget that is aligned and can deliver on that strategic plan at both the 1 and 5-year levels, and that we have more detailed actions for school year 24-25 flushed out. And so it is really based on this idea that if we have a really strong 5-year strategic plan, we have operational excellence and an aligned budget to it. We have the equity and the key values that underlie the Portland Promise that will see student success in the long term. And so that's the process, those 3 phases that we're hoping to go through over the next year to take us from the start of July 1 through to an approved budget in June. So with that, we'd love to open it up to questions from board members for either of us.
Beautiful. What board member Big Door?
This plan looks good. I just want to comment on the schedule. It's super aggressive in terms of how quickly we can achieve it, especially with community involvement and the realities of scheduling and ensuring that decision making is going through the board, is going through the required board process. So this looks great as a starting point. Just want to acknowledge how aggressive it is in terms of the schedule.
You might use this as a chance to acknowledge, and I think we've talked about it some either in our weekend updates or I'm not sure if we've talked about it kind of in public session, but the support that we'll have from Attuned, which is a technical assistance provider. So with the generous support from the Bar Foundation, they're supporting us with 3 work streams, one of which is related to this. So we'll have some additional capacity to help us kind of organize. And I have an initial launch meeting with them tomorrow, around the 3 different work streams. And then, Dr. Scallon and I are meeting with them specifically. We'll meet with them to kind of align these schedules and timelines. So there'll be able to be some additional capacity for us to help shepherd this process through.
Yeah, and I know incoming superintendent Scallon. I don't know. The titles are just all over the place. I know you've already asked for this, but just want to say it out loud is that, we got a ton of data in our process with Alma, and being able to maybe start with that as a foundation. I think it may also help us expedite if we start with the groups of people we've already convened to continue a conversation with them. It may decrease the lift a little bit and help with that expediency, because I agree, this feels really ambitious, but I mean, let's do it. But I think we'll have to figure out ways to engage people that are already maybe in the process without missing other people.
Can I just make a comment there too, that you might remember just from earlier tonight, 950 people gave input to our high school work as well. Yeah. So some of those questions are pretty targeted to the high school work, but some are not. So I think that's another significant data set where people have taken quite a bit of time to speak with the district, that we should include in that too.
Beautiful.
And can I just add one piece to that? Because I 100% agree with the comments both from board chair as well as board member Figdor, that it's really aggressive. I think one of the things that I would add caution to there is about the number of structural shifts we even attempt to consider within this time frame, right? We have the challenge of managing and balancing the budget and the capacity to do this well. And so part of that, I think, is balancing it there. And then, as folks just mentioned, there's a lot of work that's already happened here. And so I've been working with Deputy Superintendent Townsend and others to really understand what's the data we already have so that we can use it to identify the trends, share it out, but not repeat the process.
And just on that note, because I'm not sure that everybody knows, but incoming Superintendent Scallon has already immersed himself in kind of as much of the processes and knowledge gathering that he can do while still not living here and being on our payroll. So I just really appreciate that, all of the work that you're doing, so that literally when you get here, you are already running. So just gratitude for that. Anything else from folks? Okay. So I think it'll be interesting to see where we go from here. Board Member Opperman, did you have a thought?
Just on the, identifying key trends. One of the things I'm new on the board. So one of the key things in understanding what we had this year, which we tried to carry forward, and what was in the past, as far as programming and ways of addressing programming, I just feel it's such an incredible lack of knowledge on details of within finances, and I find myself question what's in what does this line and what does this line in this mean, and so I think looking on the listening and learning, I know that granted, we aren't supposed to be working until August again, but I certainly would be I would be very willing to hear more detail of what the facts you find, and or be given to them directly anyway, because I think that as I said to Superintendent
Somebody.
you.
One of you.
Sorry, Aaron. So Superintendent Townsend is that, this list of things in the past that we've done, are those the best ways of looking at things? And I don't know.
No, yeah. And I think, as we talked about, recognizing kind of that listen and learn phase over that time is work, on the members of, like, for you all. And so had that kind of, certainly in my mind from our conversation at the of what we'll need to do to make sure you're positioned to be able to take positions, right, and make informed decisions as we move towards decision making.
Yeah. And just on that note, I would be in favor of a deep dive into the budget in potentially August, that then we could share with also, because I know, Dr. Scallon's going to need that. There are board members that need that, and future board members that might be coming on in November will need that context. So I think it is a good use of time to get our foundational knowledge built around this while we're moving forward with other things. And just another follow-up question around this plan. It looks really good. What are the next steps, and who is holding this body of work right now?
Well, I think one of them is, just launching this partnership with the Tuned and kind of aligning, some of their framework. They had a draft one, but recognized needed to kind of come to the table. Certainly, with Dr. Scallon now entering, we've been working already on trying to align that, in terms of the vision for, that he's held for, his entry, right, that we heard about through the interview process, certainly, and kind of getting going. So that's one of the immediate steps. And then I think in July, we're really starting to hammer out dates and get really tactical about things. And know that these questions are kind of board retreat workshops, right? Where role do those play? And really kind of fleshing out the action plan associated with it.
Beautiful. So it sounds like the immediate next steps are going to be held by you and Dr. Scallon, and then you'll come back to us in August with updates, if not before then.
Yep.
And do you anticipate working directly with the Finance Committee and Operations Committee first, or do you feel like you'll be bringing things to the board directly? Or if you haven't gotten that far, that's okay too. I'm just trying to understand how the work is going to flow.
So I'm speaking prematurely on this because I think we
All
still.
right. I think we all are.
I think we still need to figure it out. I think
Okay.
the one thing that I came out of with that finance committee meeting the other day was that there was a need for additional touch points.
Mhm.
Right? Whether it's the budget in August to just a whole number of decisions that need to happen between now and June.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to sit down with members of the board and Aaron and others to really figure out what's that cadence.
Great.
Gets you guys the information you need in a way to make decisions, but doesn't slow down the process.
Great. Okay. So it sounds like to be determined, but it sounds like a great path forward. Any other questions or discussion? Okay. Then I think we did it. Thank you for a great first presentation, Dr. Scallon, and we'll see you on Friday of this week. Okay.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Everybody have a good night.
Good night.
Thanks, you too.